Good morning, fourth grade. Uncle Peyton, do you think you could talk about what happened in the castle now? Charlie asked tentatively. Peyton scratched his chin and said, Yes, Charlie, it's about time. He drained his cup and set it back on the table. For a moment, he stared into space, and then he began. Imagine the castle as I described it, dark without and dark within. I arrived at dawn, but there's never a sunrise at Ubeam Castle. The sky turns a dull yellow, and no birds sing. The wind shrieks over the stones. There are no trees, no leaves or flowers, only the dead grass. The road ends at a narrow footbridge, so I left the car and walked the half mile to the castle. 13 steps carved into the rock led up to a door that is never locked. After all, who would want to enter a place like that? Peyton paused and hunched his shoulders. And then, said Charlie, it all came back to me. Charlie, my mother's horrible fall, and my father's rushing away with me. I almost turned and ran, but I had to find out if Yolanda had left and why she was coming south after all these years. I called, but there was no reply. The place seemed deserted, and then it began. First laughter, like I'd never heard, more like howling it was, and then a roar, and the screams of 1,000 animals that you could never name. And out of this awful noise, a voice called, What do you want, Peyton, you beam? I stood my ground, but I can tell you, Charlie, my stomach was churning. And I said, Is that Yolanda's voice? No, came the reply. Yolanda had an invitation she couldn't refuse. And then the awful laugh came again. I ran for the door, but something pushed me back. I brought out the wand and tried to strike the invisible thing in front of me, but the wand hissed like a thing on fire and burned my hand. After that, Peyton sighed and shook his head. I don't know how long I was there. I lay on the stone floor, blind and never knowing if I was awake or dreaming. My body was either burning or freezing. Sometimes I would see him, but he never looked the same. One minute he'd be a child, then an old man. One day there'd be a great black dog beside me, then a bear. There'd be a raven tearing my head, a wolf gnawing my bones. But every time, as soon as he'd gone, I'd crawl a little closer to the door. Eventually, I reached it. I pulled myself up by the great iron handle, turned it, and fell through the door. I stumbled down the 13 steps, and then I ran. Don't ask me how. I could feel him behind me, burning my neck, scorching my shoes. I got to the car and tumbled in. The nightmare had only begun. He jumped on the roof and smashed the windshield with his fist. I don't know what shape he was, a monster. By the sound of it, he rolled off and ran in front of me, hurling rocks at the headlights. He threw flames at the tires, and the way ahead was lit by 1,000 sparks. We reached another bridge, and when I drove over it, he fell away. Perhaps his power couldn't survive beyond the borders of his land. But I heard him call after me, and I'll never forget that awful wailing voice. Peyton shivered and closed his eyes. Charlie waited expectantly, but then he could wait no longer and begged. What did he say? Peyton gave a droll smile. He said, If you harm my dear one, you'll pay for it with your life. And who is he? I didn't say, Peyton grimaced. He's Yolanda's father, Yoroth, a shapeshifter so old he can't keep his own shape, but he has to borrow from other beings. Peyton looked at the burn marks on his right hand and repeated, Yes, other beings. Wow, Uncle Peyton, Charlie said gravely. It's amazing that you didn't end up dead. Peyton nodded. Amazing indeed. I don't know what kept me alive, Charlie, unless it was the memory of my mother and a certain other person. He cleared his throat. Yolanda may have come to help Ezekiel, but now that she knows what you can do, she'll want to take you back, you know. To Ubing Castle? Squeaked Charlie. We won't let it happen, said Peyton firmly. And now, on a brighter note, you've got things to do. Charlie plans to make for rescuing the invisible boy. If you ask me, Billy Raven is the key. Billy? How? He can talk to creatures, can't he? Get him to talk to that boa. It can't be all bad. Charlie sat thinking about this while his uncle went to the stove and made himself an enormous breakfast to make up for all the days he'd been without. A little later, Mrs. Bone came downstairs from her room on the top floor. She'd heard none of the shouting and slamming that had gone on earlier, and was so astonished to see Peyton up and about and better than ever, she almost fainted. Grabbing a chair, Amy Bone sat down heavily and muttered, "That strange gentleman from the painting can't have been so bad after all. Oh, Peyton, I'm so glad you're well. We'll all sleep easier on our beds now that you're back in form." Charlie wondered why Scarpo had stopped being a bad-tempered trickster and decided to be helpful. Was it when he saw the wand in Charlie's hands? And if so, why? At 1 o'clock, Charlie politely declined Peyton's offer of a special lunch ordered by phone from the grandest store in town and set off for the Pets Cafe. He had too much on his mind to enjoy a rich meal. Orange juice and cookies would do nicely. All his friends were there, sitting around the largest table in the room were birds, gerbils, rabbits, and Fidelia's deaf cat sitting on shoulders, heads, and laps. Runner Bean greeted Charlie in the usual rough, wet manner, pawing, licking, and barking until Charlie bought him a large cookie and threw it under the table. "Is everyone ready?" said Lysander rather severely. "We've got urgent matters to discuss. Tancred and I have made a list, and we'd like some input from the rest of you." He placed a sheet of lined paper in the middle of the table. It read: 1. The blue boa to be found. 2. The blue boa to be tamed. 3. The blue boa to be taken out of Bloor's Academy to a place where it can cure Ollie. 4. Ollie Sparks to be found. 5. Ollie Sparks must leave Bloor's Academy while still invisible. Easiest that way. 6. The blue boa to make Ollie visible. 7. Ollie must be taken home to Sparkling Castle. That was my daughter home from nursing school. Everyone stared at the list written in Lysander's admirable calligraphy. They passed the paper around the table until they had all read it thoroughly, and when this had been done, their faces looked either doubtful or downright gloomy. "It's not that bad," said Charlie. "For one thing, I know where the boa is, and I can find it again." "But how do we tame it?" asked Emma. "Billy," asked Charlie. "He can talk to animals. So how do we persuade Billy to do that?" asked Olivia. "I mean, would you like to have a conversation with an oversized invisible making snake?" "I trust Billy now," said Charlie. "I really think he wants to help us." "Rembrandt," Gabriel said thoughtfully. "We'll tell Billy if he helps us, he can have Rembrandt. He'd do anything to see that rat again. He loves it." "Good idea, Gabriel," said Lysander. "But with Whedon and Manford on the lookout, not to mention that awful Bell, where on earth is Billy going to keep that rat?" Charlie thought of Cook. "I know somewhere," he said, but when they all looked at him for more information, he said, "Trust me." "Okay," said Lysander. "Now we've had to find a way of getting the boa out of the academy." "I've got an idea," said Charlie. "I'm working on it." His friends stared at him with questions forming on their lips. But Charlie added quickly, "I can't tell you anything yet, but I know I'll be able to work it out." Once again, he was thinking of Cook. "Now we come to Ollie." Tancred pointed to number 5 on the sheet. "Actually, I've thought of that," said Emma, reddening slightly as everyone turned to look at her. She put an enormous spider on the table. There were several loud gasps, and a wild blast of air blew the paper off the table as Tancred yelled, "Yikes! How's that going to help?" "Give her a chance," said Olivia, retrieving the paper. "It's not real," said Emma, slipping her finger into the spider's body. "It's like a finger puppet, only Ollie can put it on his toe. Then he can walk through the main doors whenever one of the staff goes out, and they'll just see a spider instead of a toe." "That's brilliant," said everyone except Tancred, who obviously had a thing about spiders. "A leaping spider," he muttered. "I mean, it's hardly going to walk like a real spider. It is on the end of a great leaping foot." There were shouts of, "Don't be so picky. It's a great idea. Got a better one? It'll work. And you haven't got to wear it, Tank." "What about Ollie then?" said Tancred. "Where's he going to go when he's out? We won't be around to help him. We can't get out dressed as spiders." Olivia said, we've thought of that, Emma and me. He can go to the bookshop. It's easy to find because it's right beside the cathedral, and you can see that from anywhere in the city. I've told my aunt if someone rings her doorbell after hours, but there's no one there, except a spider, muttered Tancred. Anyway, Emma went on, she'll look after him until we can get him visible. Charlie's mind was racing. His uncle would soon have to buy a new car. Suppose he bought a van. Mid semester was coming up. Would a journey to Sparkling Castle be possible for 8 children and a dog? I think we've got enough sorted out to start our little operation, said Lysander. Let's begin on Monday night with numbers 1 and 2, the finding and taming of the boa. Charlie had a problem: how to get Billy up to the West Wing attics without being seen. Distraction, said Tancred, who seemed to have recovered his composure. Leave it to us, Lysander and me. We can do it. Can't we, Sander? Lysander nodded. They left the Pets Cafe in very good spirits, each one of them eager to begin the week ahead. At that moment, none of the 7 children wanted to consider the pitfalls of their mission. They could only imagine the visible Ollie Sparks, reunited at last with his grieving parents. While the others went home to feed their pets or work on the end of semester play, Charlie took Runner Bean for a walk. And when he returned the dog to Pet's Cafe, Mr. Onimus popped out from behind the counter. Something's going on, said the little man. If you need a hand, Charlie, you know where to come. Charlie thanked Mr. Onimus and ran back to Filbert Street, eager to see if his uncle's amazing recovery had lasted. It had. And when Charlie looked into the kitchen, he was astonished to see his mother and Peyton having tea with Grandma Bone. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say dessert rather than tea. It was a hot afternoon, and Peyton had ordered several tubs of liqueur-laced ice cream from the same grand store that had provided his lunch. Charlie was invited to join them, and he sat opposite Grandma Bone, who was guzzling a large bowl of green and brown striped ice cream topped with almonds. She didn't so much as glance at Charlie, but kept spooning the ice cream into her mouth at a rate of 2 spoonfuls a second, by Charlie's reckoning. Chocolate cherry rum and walnut, toffee apple brandy and almonds, or coffee orange whiskey and peanut? Peyton asked Charlie. Charlie chose the chocolate and began to dig in. It was the most delicious ice cream he'd ever tasted. He hoped Peyton's recovery meant that more of the same would be arriving at number 9 every weekend. Grandma Bone's bowl was now empty. She stared at it rather sadly and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Charlie thought she looked tipsy. When she got up, she swayed a little as she moved to the sink. She had still not said a word or even looked in Charlie's direction. What happened to her? Charlie's mother said, That was just about the best thing I've ever tasted. Thank you, Peyton. You're very welcome. Peyton winked at Charlie as Grandma Bone made slow and stately progress past the table and out of the room. What's happened to Grandma? Charlie whispered. His mother put a finger to her lips. Charlie grinned. It was only then that he noticed the wicker basket sitting just inside the door. It gave him an idea. When his grandmother had finally tottered upstairs and closed her door, Charlie asked his uncle where the basket had come from. It's a food hamper, Charlie said. Peyton, the store sent it around with my lunch. Charlie went to investigate. The hamper hadn't been entirely emptied. There were still several jars of jam, a fruitcake, and 2 packages of cookies left inside. Charlie picked out a jar of best strawberry conserve. Whole strawberries? Charlie murmured. Uncle Peyton, could I have this jam? Of course, Charlie. I think I can guess what it's for. And the hamper, said Charlie. Do you think you could get the store to send an even bigger one to cook at Bloor's Academy? The very biggest they've got? Charlie, whatever for, said his mother. Charlie's got a plan, said Peyton. We'll just have to go along with it and not ask too many questions, Amy. Mrs. Bone shook her head. I hope it won't stir things up again, she said. Grandma Bones settled down nicely this afternoon. Too nicely, Charlie muttered, and too quiet. Something's brewing, you can tell. I wonder what the ants are up to. I hope everyone's doing well. I miss you guys.